I bought the cabin on a Tuesday in late September, exactly 1 week after my 57th birthday. The realtor handed me the keys with a smile that said she understood what this meant to me. 35 years of working double shifts at the textile factory, of skipping vacations and brown bagging lunches, of saying no to myself so I could say yes to everyone else. 35 years, and now I finally had something that was mine alone. The cabin sat on the eastern shore of Lake Winona, about 2 hours north of Minneapolis. It was small, just under 1,000 square feet, with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that opened into a living room, and a porch that wrapped around 3 sides. The wood siding had weathered to a soft gray, and the roof needed replacing within the next few years. But I did not care. When I stood on that porch and looked out at the water, I felt something I had not felt in decades. Peace. I spent my first week there alone, deliberately. I did not tell anyone except my sister Helen where I was going. I needed this time to be selfish, to wake up without an alarm, to drink my coffee while watching the sunrise paint the lake gold and pink. I needed to remember what it felt like to answer to no one. The cabin came furnished with mismatched pieces that somehow worked together. A floral couch that had seen better days, but was comfortable enough for afternoon naps. A wooden dining table with 4 chairs, one of which wobbled unless you knew which leg to avoid. The bedroom had a queen bed with a patchwork quilt, and the second bedroom held a twin bed and an old dresser. Everything smelled faintly of pine and old books, and I loved it. I spent those first days exploring the property. The cabin sat on 2 acres of land, most of it wooded. A narrow path led down to a small dock where the previous owner had left an aluminum canoe. I did not know how to canoe, but I thought maybe I would learn. The shed stood about 30 yards from the cabin, a sturdy structure with shelves full of gardening tools and fishing equipment I did not know how to use yet. On my 5th day there, I walked into town. The village of Winona Landing was exactly what I had hoped for. A general store, a diner, a post office, and not much else. The woman behind the counter at the general store introduced herself as Betty and asked if I was visiting. When I told her I had bought the old riverside cabin, her face lit up. Oh, the one that belonged to the widow. She loved that place. Lived there 40 years before she moved in with her son. You are going to be happy there, I can tell. Betty rang up my groceries and then leaned across the counter. Fair warning, though. The loons get loud at night and the black flies are terrible in June. But September through May? Paradise. I believed her. I had already fallen in love with the sound of the loons. Their calls at dusk made me feel less alone, though I enjoyed the solitude. For the first time in my adult life, I was not taking care of anyone but myself. My daughter was 32 and married with a good job. My ex-husband had been out of the picture for over a decade. My responsibilities had finally ended, and I could breathe. On Saturday morning, I woke to the sound of tires on gravel. I was not expecting anyone. I pulled on my robe and went to the window, my stomach already tightening with a familiar dread. A silver SUV was parked in my driveway, and my daughter was climbing out of the driver's side. Vanessa looked like she had just stepped out of a magazine. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, and she wore white jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her husband followed her out of the passenger side, his phone already in his hand. His name was Bradley, and in the 3 years since the wedding, I had yet to have a conversation with him that lasted longer than 5 minutes. I opened the door before they could knock. This is a surprise. Vanessa smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. We tried calling, but you did not answer. I left my phone inside. I was down at the dock. This was a lie. My phone was charging in the bedroom, but I had been ignoring it on purpose. What are you doing here? Can we come in? She was already moving past me, Bradley trailing behind her. They both stopped in the living room, and I watched Vanessa's gaze sweep across the space. I could see her cataloging everything, her expression shifting from polite interest to something else, something calculating. "So this is it," she said. "The cabin. This is it." I closed the door and crossed my arms. "You drove 2 hours to see it?" "We wanted to check on you. Make sure you were settling in okay." Vanessa walked over to the window and looked out at the lake. "It is nice, Mom. Really peaceful." "That is the point." Bradley was taking pictures with his phone, moving from room to room without asking permission. I wanted to tell him to stop, but I did not. I had learned over the years that setting boundaries with my daughter and her husband only led to arguments about how unreasonable I was being. "How much land do you have?" Vanessa asked. 2 acres. Most of it is wooded." "And the shed?" She pointed through the window. "Came with the property. It has tools and things." She nodded slowly, and I could practically see the wheels turning in her head. "This place has a lot of potential." Those 4 words made my chest tighten. Potential for what? Just potential. She turned back to face me, her smile bright and sharp. "Anyway, we cannot stay long. We just wanted to make sure you were okay out here all by yourself." They left 20 minutes later, after walking around the property and asking questions about the well water and the septic system, and whether the dock was stable. I stood on the porch and watched them drive away, and I knew with absolute certainty that this was not over. Vanessa had looked at my cabin the way she used to look at my house before she convinced me to downsize so she could invest the equity I got from selling it. 3 days passed before Vanessa called. I was sitting on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the afternoon light shift across the water, when my phone buzzed. I considered not answering, but that would only delay the inevitable. "Hi, honey." "Mom, I have been thinking about the cabin." Vanessa's voice had that tone she used when she was about to ask for something. Bright and enthusiastic and completely inflexible. "Bradley and I did some research, and we think you are sitting on a gold mine. I am not selling it. I am not asking you to sell. Listen, the vacation rental market is booming right now. Places like yours on the lake, with that rustic charm, people pay top dollar for that experience. We could turn your cabin into an Airbnb and make serious money." I set my tea down carefully. "Vanessa, I bought this place so I could have somewhere quiet to live. I do not want strangers staying here. You would not have to deal with them. Bradley and I would manage everything. We would handle the bookings, the cleaning, the maintenance. All you would have to do is collect your share of the profits. I do not want profits. I want peace." There was a pause, and when she spoke again, her voice had cooled. "Mom, be realistic. You are 57 years old. How long do you think your savings are going to last? You worked at a factory, not a bank. This is an opportunity to secure your future." "My future is secure. I saved for this." "You saved enough to buy a cabin, but what about property taxes? Maintenance? What happens when the roof needs replacing or the well pump dies? Those things cost thousands of dollars." She was speaking faster now, her words tumbling over each other. "An Airbnb would pay for itself and then some. You could even retire early, really retire, and not worry about money ever again." I closed my eyes. This was how she worked. She found your weak spots and pressed until you gave in. And she was right about one thing. Money was tighter than I wanted to admit. The cabin had taken most of my savings, and I was living on Social Security and a small pension. I had enough to get by, but not enough for emergencies. "I will think about it," I said finally. "That is all I'm asking. Just think about it." Her voice brightened immediately. "We could come up this weekend and talk through the details. Bradley has a whole business plan worked out." Of course he did. "Vanessa, I said I will think about it. I did not say yes. I know, but just hear us out, okay? This could be really good for both of us. She hung up before I could respond. I sat there for a long time, staring at the lake and feeling the peace I had found slipping through my fingers like water. They arrived on Saturday morning, just like before. But this time they brought a folder full of printouts and spreadsheets. Bradley set up his laptop on my dining table without asking, and Vanessa made coffee in my kitchen while talking about occupancy rates and seasonal pricing strategies. "Look at these numbers," Bradley said, turning the laptop so I could see the screen. "Cabins like yours rent for $300 to $500 a night during peak season. Even in the off-season, you could get $200 easy. If you rent it out just 20 weeks a year, that is over $40,000 in gross revenue." "Minus expenses," I said. "Minus expenses, sure. But even with a 30% overhead, you are looking at nearly $30,000 in profit. And that is a conservative estimate." He clicked to another spreadsheet. "We put together a renovation plan that would maximize the property's appeal. New appliances, fresh paint, better furniture, professional photos. We estimate about $100,000 in upgrades, but the return on investment would be immediate." $100,000? I stared at him. "I do not have that kind of money." "We know." Vanessa set a mug of coffee in front of me and sat down. "That is why Bradley and I want to invest. We will cover the renovation costs, and in exchange, we will take a larger share of the profits for the first 2 years. After that, we will renegotiate, and you will start earning more. It is a win-win." "And where would I live during the renovations?" "You could stay in the shed," Vanessa said, as if this were the most reasonable suggestion in the world. "We would clean it out, make it comfortable. It would only be for a few weeks." I looked at my daughter, this woman I had raised and sacrificed for, and felt something shift inside me. She was asking me to move into a shed so she could turn my home into a business. She was asking me to give up the one thing I had worked my entire life to achieve. "No," I said. Vanessa blinked. "No? No. I am not turning my cabin into an Airbnb, and I am not moving into the shed. This is my home." Her expression hardened. "Mom, you are being short-sighted. This is about your future." "My future is living here, in peace, like I planned." Bradley closed his laptop. "With all due respect, you are not thinking clearly. The numbers do not lie. This property is underutilized, and you are leaving money on the table." "Then I guess I will just have to live with that." Vanessa stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Fine. If you want to be stubborn, that is your choice. But do not come crying to us when you cannot afford to keep this place." They left angry, the SUV kicking up gravel as Bradley accelerated down the driveway. I sat at the table for a long time, my coffee growing cold, and tried to convince myself I had made the right decision. But doubt is a persistent thing. Over the next week, I kept thinking about what Vanessa had said. What would I do if the roof needed replacing? What if the well pump died? I had enough saved for small repairs, but anything major would wipe me out. And then what? I would lose the cabin anyway, only I would lose it to the bank instead of to my daughter's business plan. On Thursday afternoon, Vanessa called again. This time she sounded calmer, more measured. "Mom, I am sorry about how we left things. I know we came on too strong." "You did. I just worry about you. You worked so hard for this place, and I want to make sure you can keep it." She paused. "What if we compromised? What if we just did a few small upgrades, nothing major, and tested the waters with a few rental weekends? If it does not work out, we will drop the whole thing, but at least you would know you tried." I wanted to say no again. I wanted to hold my ground. But the past week had been filled with small anxieties that I could not shake. A stain on the ceiling that might be a leak. A strange noise from the water heater. Every little thing felt like a countdown to disaster. "Just a few weekends?" I asked. "Just a few. We will handle everything." You would not even have to leave. I am not moving into the shed, Vanessa. You would not have to. You could stay in the cabin, just maybe keep to your bedroom when guests are here. Or you could visit Aunt Helen for the weekend. It would be completely up to you. It sounded reasonable. It sounded like a compromise. And I was tired of fighting. Okay, a few weekends. But if I do not like how it goes, we stop. Absolutely. Thank you, Mom. You will not regret this. I already did, but I did not say that. The renovation started the following Monday. Vanessa hired a crew of 3 men who arrived at 7 in the morning with a truck full of tools and materials. She told me the work would take 2 weeks, maybe 3. They would repaint the interior, replace the kitchen countertops and appliances, update the bathroom fixtures, and refinish the floors. Small upgrades, she had said. Nothing major. By the end of the first day, my cabin looked like a construction zone. Furniture was stacked in the bedrooms, covered with tarps. The kitchen was gutted, the old stove and refrigerator sitting on the porch waiting to be hauled away. Dust covered everything. I spent most of the day outside, sitting on the dock and trying to ignore the sound of power tools and men shouting to each other over the noise. On Tuesday, Vanessa showed up with a designer named Crystal, who had opinions about everything. The floral couch had to go. Too dated. The dining table could stay, but they would need new chairs. The bedrooms needed completely different furniture, something more modern and photogenic. Crystal walked through the cabin with her phone, taking pictures and making notes, while Vanessa nodded along to every suggestion. "What about my things?" I asked. "Where am I supposed to put my furniture?" "We will store it in the shed," Vanessa said. "Do not worry. We will keep it safe." By Wednesday, the shed was full of my belongings. The floral couch I had napped on, the dresser that had been my grandmother's, the patchwork quilt. Everything that had made the cabin feel like mine was now hidden away, and strangers were deciding what would replace it. I tried to talk to Vanessa about it, but she was always busy, always on the phone or in a meeting with Crystal or reviewing invoices with Bradley. When I finally cornered her on Friday afternoon, she barely looked up from her laptop. "Mom, I know this is hard, but trust me. These upgrades are necessary if we want to attract high-end renters. You said small upgrades. You said nothing major. These are small. We are just refreshing the space." She finally looked at me, and her expression softened slightly. "I know it feels like a lot right now, but when it is done, you are going to love it. And more importantly, guests are going to love it. That is the whole point. The point was supposed to be that I could keep living here. And you can, between bookings. Look, we already have 5 reservations for October and November. People are excited about this place. We are going to make so much money, Mom. You will see." The renovation stretched into a 3rd week, then a 4th. The budget ballooned from $100,000 to $120,000. Vanessa assured me it was all necessary, all part of the plan. Bradley showed me updated spreadsheets that projected even higher profits, as if numbers on a screen could make up for the fact that my home no longer felt like mine. By the time the work was finished, the cabin was unrecognizable. The walls were painted a crisp white. The kitchen had granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. The furniture was all sleek and modern, bought from expensive stores and arranged for maximum Instagram appeal. Even the porch had been upgraded with new Adirondack chairs and a fire pit that looked like something out of a catalog. Crystal took professional photos, hundreds of them, and Vanessa uploaded them to the Airbnb listing she had created. The cabin was described as a luxury lakeside retreat, with rustic charm and modern amenities. The nightly rate was $450. The first booking was 2 weeks away, a couple from Chicago coming up for a long weekend. I stood in the middle of my living room, surrounded by furniture I had not chosen and could not sit on comfortably, and realized that I had lost. I had said no, and it had not mattered. I had set boundaries, and they had been ignored. My daughter had taken my home and turned it into her investment, and I had let her do it because I was afraid of being alone and poor and helpless. But as I stood there, something else bloomed alongside the grief. Something cold and sharp and patient. If Vanessa wanted to turn my cabin into an Airbnb, then fine. Let her. Let her spend her $120,000. Let her book guests and promise them a luxury experience. And then, let me show her exactly what happens when you take something that does not belong to you. The couple from Chicago arrived on a Friday afternoon in mid-October. I watched from the shed window as they pulled up in a sleek black sedan, both of them dressed like they were heading to a business meeting rather than a lake vacation. The woman wore heels that sank into the gravel driveway, and the man immediately pulled out his phone to take pictures. Vanessa had insisted I stay in the shed during guest visits. She had cleaned it out and brought in a cot, a space heater, and a small lamp. It was humiliating, living in a storage building while strangers slept in my bed, but I did not complain. I needed Vanessa to think I had accepted defeat. I needed her to believe I was harmless. The Chicago couple stayed for 3 nights. I did not see much of them, though I heard their voices carrying across the property when they sat on the porch in the evenings. On Sunday morning, they left a 5-star review praising the cabin's cleanliness and the stunning lake views. Vanessa called me immediately, her voice bright with triumph. "See? I told you this would work. They loved it." "That is good," I said, keeping my tone neutral. The next guests check in on Thursday, a family with 2 kids. They booked for a whole week. She paused. "I am going to need you to stay in the shed again. I know it is not ideal, but once we get through this first season and start seeing real profits, we can talk about maybe building you a small guest house or something." A guest house, on my own property. I thanked her and hung up, before I said something I would regret. That night, I walked down to the dock and sat in the darkness, listening to the loons. The air had turned cold, and I could see my breath. Winter was coming, and I wondered how many more guests Vanessa would book before the lake froze over. How many more times I would be exiled to the shed while strangers enjoyed what I had worked 35 years to earn. The family arrived on Thursday just before dinner time. 2 parents in their 40s, a girl about 10, and a boy who could not have been more than 6. They had a golden retriever with them, which surprised me because the Airbnb listing explicitly said no pets. I watched the dog run around the property, digging in the garden beds and barking at the loons. The family stayed for 6 days. They were loud and messy, leaving towels on the porch and trash in the fire pit. On their last morning, I saw the mother yelling at her children while the father loaded suitcases into their minivan. They left without cleaning up, and when Vanessa arrived that afternoon to prepare for the next guests, I heard her on the phone with the cleaning service, frustrated about the extra work. But they also left a 5-star review. The father wrote that the cabin was perfect for families, and the kids loved feeding the ducks at the dock. There were no ducks. I had never seen a single duck on this lake. But Vanessa did not care about accuracy. She cared about ratings and bookings and the money that kept rolling in. October turned into November, and the bookings did not slow down. Vanessa had listed the cabin as available through December, billing it as a winter wonderland retreat. She bought a fake Christmas tree and decorated the porch with lights. She stocked the kitchen with hot chocolate mix and marshmallows. She created an entire fantasy, and people paid premium prices to experience it. I spent most of November in the shed, living like a squatter on my own property. I kept the space heater running constantly, but it barely made a dent in the cold. I slept in layers of clothing and woke up stiff and aching every morning. When I showered in the cabin's bathroom between guest stays, I saw how thin I had become. My face looked hollow, and there were shadows under my eyes that had not been there before. My sister Helen called one evening in late November. "Fiona, I have not heard from you in weeks. Are you okay?" I almost told her the truth. I almost said that my daughter had stolen my life, and I was too tired to fight back. But Helen would have tried to fix it, and fixing it would have meant confrontation, Lawyers, family drama, that would accomplish nothing except making Vanessa even more determined to prove she was right. "I am fine," I said. "Just adjusting to cabin life. Vanessa told me about the Airbnb thing. She said you are making good money." "Vanessa is making good money. I am just along for the ride." Helen was quiet for a moment. "You do not sound fine." "I am tired. That is all." After we hung up, I sat in the shed and stared at the space heater's orange glow. Tired did not begin to cover it. I was exhausted in a way that sleep could not fix. Exhausted from smiling and nodding and pretending everything was okay while my daughter dismantled my dreams piece by piece. But exhaustion can sharpen into something useful if you let it, and I was done being useful to everyone except myself. The next guests were a group of college friends reuniting for Thanksgiving weekend. 4 women in their 50s who drank too much wine and stayed up until 2 a.m. laughing on the porch. I did not mind the noise. What I minded was waking up on Thanksgiving morning to find one of them had vomited in the garden bed outside the shed. I cleaned it up myself because I did not want Vanessa to know I was still on the property. She had started hinting that maybe I should spend the winter at Helen's house, just until the busy season ended. I knew what that meant. Once I left, I would never come back. The cabin would become a full-time rental, and I would become an occasional visitor to the place I had bought with my own money. The college friends left a 4-star review, complaining that the hot water ran out too quickly. Vanessa immediately called a plumber and upgraded the water heater, adding another $2,000 to her investment. She did not ask me if I minded. She did not even tell me it was happening. I found out when the plumber showed up on a Tuesday morning and started working while I was still in the cabin. December brought snow and ice and a parade of guests who tracked mud through my living room and left wet boots by the door. Vanessa hired a property management company to handle the turnovers, because she was too busy to drive up from Minneapolis every few days. Now I had strangers with keys letting themselves in, cleaning and restocking and treating the cabin like it was just another job. I waited until the 3rd week of December, when the calendar showed a gap between bookings, 5 empty days before a New Year's Eve reservation. Vanessa was planning to charge $800 a night for that one, capitalizing on people's desire to ring in the new year at a picturesque lake cabin. I had 5 days to make my move, and I knew exactly what I was going to do. The plan came to me in pieces over those cold weeks in the shed, crystallizing into something both simple and devastating. Vanessa had turned my cabin into a business, so I would treat it like a business. And every business has vulnerabilities. On the first empty day, I let myself into the cabin and walked through it slowly, relearning the space. Everything gleamed with aggressive cleanliness. The property management company had done their job well. Fresh linens on the beds, towels folded into decorative shapes in the bathroom, a bowl of fake lemons on the kitchen counter. It looked like a hotel, sterile and impersonal. I started in the kitchen. I adjusted the pilot light on the new stove so it would flicker unpredictably, making it difficult to maintain consistent temperatures. Not enough to be dangerous, but enough to frustrate anyone trying to cook a proper meal. Then I loosened the connection on the garbage disposal just slightly, so it would make a grinding noise that sounded expensive. In the bathroom, I adjusted the shower valve so the water temperature would fluctuate wildly between scalding and freezing. I had learned this trick from a maintenance worker at the factory who used to complain about his landlord. It was a small adjustment, barely noticeable unless you knew what to look for, but it would make every shower a gamble. The bedroom came next. I took the memory foam mattress topper off the bed and replaced it with an old, lumpy one from the shed. I switched them carefully, knowing Vanessa would never notice the difference by looking. But guests would feel it. They would wake up with sore backs and stiff necks, and they would mention it in their reviews. I moved through the cabin like a ghost, making tiny alterations that would add up to a miserable experience. I adjusted the thermostat so it would never quite reach the set temperature. I loosened a floorboard near the bedroom door so it would creak loudly whenever someone walked over it. I removed half the light bulbs in the lamps, leaving just enough light to be functional, but creating shadows that would make the cabin feel darker and less welcoming. In the living room, I repositioned the furniture so the seating arrangements felt awkward and uncomfortable. The couch now faced away from the best view of the lake. The chairs were angled in a way that made conversation difficult. Small things, subtle things, things that would register as vaguely wrong without being obviously sabotaged. I spent hours on these adjustments, working methodically and carefully. When I was finished, I walked through the cabin one more time, checking my work. Everything looked normal. That was the beauty of it. Vanessa would not see anything wrong. The property management company would not notice. But the guests would feel it. That creeping sense that something was off. The New Year's Eve guests arrived on December 30th. A group of 8 friends in their 30s, loud and excited and already drunk when they pulled up in their rented SUV. I watched them unload coolers full of champagne and bags full of party supplies. They were planning something big, and I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. I stayed in the shed that night, but I kept my window cracked open so I could hear. Around 8 in the evening, someone started yelling about the stove not working properly. An hour later, I heard shrieking from the bathroom, followed by complaints about the water temperature. By 10 o'clock, people were arguing about where to sit because the furniture arrangement was so uncomfortable. At midnight, I heard them counting down to the new year, their voices carrying across the frozen lake. But the celebration sounded muted, lacking the joy they had arrived with. At 2 in the morning, I heard someone crying. By 3, the cabin was silent except for that creaking floorboard as people walked back and forth to the bathroom. They left early on New Year's Day, hours before their checkout time. Through the shed window, I watched them load their SUV with grim faces and tired eyes. One woman was still in her pajamas, wrapped in a blanket, and looking like she had not slept at all. The review appeared 2 days later. 3 stars. The first non-5-star review the cabin had received. The writer complained about the uncomfortable furniture, the unreliable stove, the temperamental shower, and the noisy floorboards that kept everyone awake. They said the cabin looked better in photos than in person, and they would not be returning. Vanessa called me immediately, her voice tight with stress. "Did you see the review?" "I did." "I do not understand what happened. The property management company said everything was fine when they did the turnover. The cabin should have been perfect." "Maybe the guests were just difficult," I suggested. "Maybe." She did not sound convinced. "I am going to have someone come check everything out. Make sure all the appliances are working correctly. The last thing we need is more bad reviews." A repairman came the following week. I watched him inspect the stove, the shower, the thermostat. He scratched his head and told Vanessa everything seemed fine, maybe just normal wear and tear. He tightened a few things, adjusted a few others, and charged her $300 for the service call. But I had already been back inside. While he fixed my earlier sabotage, I created new problems. I adjusted the refrigerator temperature so food would spoil faster. I loosened the handle on the kitchen faucet so it would drip constantly. I removed the rubber seal from the bedroom window so cold air would seep in at night. The next guests checked in on January 8th. A honeymoon couple from Milwaukee who had booked 5 nights. They lasted 3 before checking out early. Their review was 2 stars. They complained about the drafty bedroom, the dripping faucet that kept them awake, and the fact that their groceries spoiled because the refrigerator was not cold enough. The husband wrote that for $400 a night, they expected better. Vanessa came to the cabin on a snowy afternoon in mid-January, and this time she brought Bradley and a home inspector. I watched from the shed as they walked through the property, the inspector taking notes and photos. They spent 3 hours examining every inch of the cabin, and when they finally left, Vanessa looked exhausted. She did not call me that night or the next day. When she finally did reach out, her voice was flat and defeated. The inspector said everything is functional but aging. He recommended about $15,000 in preventive maintenance and upgrades, new windows, better insulation, a complete plumbing inspection. "Are you going to do it?" I asked. "I do not know. We have already put in so much money, and now the reviews are tanking. We have had 3 cancellations this week because people saw the recent ratings." She sighed heavily. "Bradley thinks we should push through, invest more, turn things around. But I am starting to wonder if this was a mistake." I said nothing. I had learned that silence was often more effective than arguing. "I am going to block off February for renovations," she continued. "Get everything fixed properly this time. We cannot afford any more bad reviews." The February renovations cost another $20,000. New windows throughout the cabin, upgraded insulation, a complete overhaul of the plumbing system, professional deep cleaning, and new furniture, because Vanessa decided the current pieces were not comfortable enough. I watched crews come and go, trucks arriving with materials, contractors working in the freezing cold, and while they worked, I planned my next move. The renovations finished in early March, just in time for spring break bookings. Vanessa had reduced the nightly rate to $350, hoping to attract more guests and rebuild the cabin's reputation. She had also hired a new property management company, one with better reviews and more experience. But none of it mattered, because I had become very good at this game. The spring break guests were college students who had pooled their money for a week at the lake. They were young and excited and completely unprepared for what they found. I had spent the previous week making adjustments that the contractors had not noticed. The shower drain now clogged after every use, requiring guests to stand in ankle-deep water. The smoke detector in the bedroom had a dying battery, beeping every 45 seconds throughout the night. The porch steps had a loose board that shifted underfoot, making people feel unsafe. They left after 4 days, forfeiting the rest of their reservation. Their review was 1 star, the first the cabin had received. They warned other potential guests to avoid the property, calling it poorly maintained and potentially dangerous. After that review appeared, the cancellations accelerated. People who had booked weeks or months in advance suddenly found reasons to cancel. Vanessa tried offering discounts and upgrades, but it did not help. The cabin's rating had dropped to 3.5 stars, and in the competitive world of vacation rentals, that might as well have been 0. By April, the bookings had dried up completely. Vanessa stopped calling me with updates, and I knew she was drowning in debt and disappointment. The cabin sat empty most days, no longer profitable enough to justify the property management company's fees. She had invested over $150,000, and she had nothing to show for it except a property that no one wanted to rent. I waited 2 more weeks before I made my move. On a Tuesday morning in late April, I let myself into the cabin and reversed every sabotage I had made. I fixed the shower valve, tightened the faucet handle, adjusted the thermostat back to normal. I replaced the mattress topper with the good one, repositioned the furniture to take advantage of the lake view, and added back all the light bulbs I had removed. I changed the smoke detector battery and tightened the loose porch step. When I was finished, the cabin was exactly as it should have been from the beginning. Beautiful, comfortable, and functional. A place worth $450 a night, if anyone still believed in it. Then I called Vanessa. "I have been thinking," I said, keeping my voice gentle. "Maybe the Airbnb thing has run its course. Maybe it is time to admit it did not work out." She was quiet for a long moment. "I do not know what went wrong, Mom. We did everything right. The photos were professional, the cabin was beautiful, we priced it competitively. But nothing worked. Sometimes things just do not work out, honey. It is not your fault. We lost so much money. Bradley is furious. He thinks I should sell the cabin and try to recoup some of our investment." Her voice cracked slightly. "But I know how much this place means to you." "It does mean a lot to me," I said, "which is why I have a suggestion. What if you signed the cabin back over to me completely? No more Airbnb, no more guests, just me, living here like I originally planned. You could write off the loss on your taxes, and I would take over all the expenses going forward." You cannot afford the expenses, Mom. That is why we started this whole thing. I will manage. I always have. I paused, letting the silence stretch. The alternative is you keep sinking money into a property that is not generating revenue. At least this way you get out clean. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, could practically feel her doing the math in her head. She had invested $150,000 into a failing business. She could keep fighting, keep trying to turn things around, or she could cut her losses and walk away. Let me talk to Bradley, she said finally. But honestly, I think you might be right. This has turned into a nightmare. They came to the cabin 1 week later with papers for me to sign. Documents that transferred all responsibility back to me, that released them from any financial obligation to the property. Vanessa looked 10 years older than she had 6 months ago, her face drawn and tired. Bradley would not make eye contact with me. I signed everything without reading it carefully. I did not need to. I knew what it said. The cabin was mine again, completely and totally. All the upgrades, all the renovations, all the money they had poured into the property. Mine. After they left, I stood on the porch and looked out at the lake. The afternoon sun was warm on my face, and the loons were calling to each other across the water. The cabin behind me was better than it had been when I bought it. New windows, new appliances, upgraded plumbing, professional furniture. $150,000 in improvements that I had not paid a single cent for. And all it had cost me was a few months of discomfort and the willingness to fight for what was mine. The first morning after Vanessa signed the papers, I woke up in my own bed for the first time in months. Not the cot in the shed, not a guest bed I was borrowing between bookings, but my bed in my cabin. The morning light filtered through the new windows, warming the room. And I lay there for a long time just breathing it in. I spent that entire day moving my belongings back from the shed. The floral couch that Vanessa had deemed too dated, my grandmother's dresser, the patchwork quilt. I arranged everything alongside the new furniture, creating a blend of old and new that felt right. The cabin was mine again, but it was better than before. Stronger. Just like me. Helen called that afternoon, and this time I told her everything. About the Airbnb, the shed, the months of sabotage, the final transfer of ownership. She listened in silence until I finished. Fiona, that is the most devious thing I have ever heard you do. I know. I am so proud of you. She laughed, a sound of pure delight. Vanessa actually paid to renovate your cabin and then gave it back to you? She did not give it back. I took it back. There is a difference. Still, $150,000. That is incredible. It is not about the money, I said, though the money certainly helped. It is about the fact that she thought she could take what was mine, that she could ignore my wishes and bulldoze over my boundaries, and I would just accept it. I needed her to understand that I am not helpless. I think you made that very clear. After we hung up, I walked down to the dock and sat watching the water. The lake was starting to warm up, the ice long gone, and I could see fish jumping near the shore. In a few weeks, the black flies would arrive, just like Betty from the general store had warned. But I did not mind. This was my place, my peace, and I had fought for it in the only way I knew how. Vanessa did not call for 2 weeks. When she finally did, her voice was careful, measured. Hey, Mom, just checking in. How are you doing? I am doing well, settling back in. That is good. A pause. Bradley and I have been talking and we want to apologize. We pushed too hard with the Airbnb thing. We thought we were helping, but we should have listened to you. It was the closest thing to a real apology I had ever received from my daughter, and part of me wanted to accept it graciously. But another part, the part that had spent months living in a shed, could not quite let it go that easily. You did not think you were helping, I said quietly. You thought you knew better than me. You thought because I worked in a factory and you have a business degree that your judgment was worth more than my wishes. Mom, I am not trying to make you feel bad. I just need you to understand something. I worked 35 years for this cabin. 35 years of double shifts and skipped vacations and saying no to myself so I could say yes to you. And when I finally got something for myself, you tried to take it away. Not because you needed to, but because you could. Because you saw potential where I saw peace, and you decided your vision mattered more than mine. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought she had hung up. Then I heard her inhale shakily. You are right. I am sorry. I know you are. And I forgive you. But things are going to be different from now on. This cabin is mine. My decisions about it are final. If I want your advice, I will ask for it. Otherwise, I need you to respect my boundaries. I can do that, she said. And for once, she sounded like she meant it. We talked for a few more minutes about neutral things, the weather, Helen's new garden, a movie Vanessa had watched. When we hung up, I felt lighter. Not because everything was fixed, but because I had finally said what I needed to say. Spring turned into summer, and I fell into a rhythm that felt like the life I had always wanted. I woke with the sun and made coffee on the porch. I learned to use the canoe, paddling out onto the lake in the early mornings when the water was like glass. I planted a garden using the tools from the shed, growing tomatoes and herbs and flowers that attracted butterflies. Betty from the general store became a friend. She invited me to a book club that met at the library every other Tuesday, and I went despite my initial hesitation. The women there were kind and funny, and they welcomed me without asking too many questions about where I had come from or why I was there alone. I learned the rhythms of the lake, the way the loons called differently depending on the time of day, the way the water changed color with the weather. I learned which neighbors were friendly and which preferred to be left alone. I learned that solitude was not the same as loneliness, and that peace was something you had to protect fiercely once you found it. In July, Vanessa and Bradley came to visit. It was the first time I had seen them since they signed over the cabin, and I could tell they were nervous. They brought wine and flowers, peace offerings that I accepted graciously. We sat on the porch that evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Bradley apologized properly this time, looking me in the eye and acknowledging how badly they had handled everything. Vanessa cried a little, talking about how stressed she had been, how the financial loss had nearly destroyed her marriage, how she finally understood what I had been trying to tell her all along. I listened and nodded, and did not point out that I had told her from the beginning. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way, and Vanessa had learned hers. She had learned that shortcuts and schemes do not replace honest work, that other people's dreams are not yours to commandeer, that sometimes the best investment is respecting someone else's wishes. They stayed for dinner, and we ate grilled fish I had caught that morning and vegetables from my garden. The conversation was easier than it had been in years, free from the tension that had defined our relationship for so long. When they left, Vanessa hugged me tightly. I really am sorry, Mom. I know, honey. We are okay now. And we were. Not perfect, but okay. And okay was enough. August brought the height of summer, and with it came a letter from the county tax assessor. The cabin's value had been reassessed based on the recent renovations, and my property taxes were going up significantly. Not enough to be unmanageable, but enough to require careful budgeting. I called the assessor's office and explained the situation. The improvements had been made without my consent by my daughter for a business venture that failed. Was there any way to contest the assessment? The clerk was sympathetic, but firm. The improvements were made to the property regardless of who paid for them or why. The assessed value reflects the current state of the cabin, not the circumstances around the renovations. I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat down with a calculator and my bank statements and did the math. Even with the higher property taxes, I could manage. The cabin was worth more now, which meant I had more equity if I ever needed to borrow against it. And my expenses were low. I grew much of my own food. I did not drive much. I lived simply. Vanessa called later that week, and I mentioned the tax situation. There was a long pause before she spoke. I did not think about that. I am sorry, Mom. If you need help with the taxes, I do not need help. I can afford them. I just thought you should know that your renovations had consequences beyond the failed business. I really did not think it through, did I? No, you did not. But that is not your fault alone. I should have fought harder from the beginning instead of letting things get as far as they did. I paused. We both made mistakes. The difference is, I am learning from mine. It was a pointed comment, perhaps sharper than necessary, but I needed her to sit with the reality of what she had done, not just to punish her, but to ensure she never did it to anyone else. September arrived with cooler temperatures and the first hints of autumn color in the trees. I had been at the cabin for exactly 1 year, though only the last few months had been spent actually living there. I marked the anniversary by inviting Helen up for the weekend. She arrived on a Friday afternoon with her car full of groceries and a suitcase that suggested she was planning to stay longer than 2 days. I hope you do not mind, but I thought I might stay through Wednesday. It is so beautiful here, and I never take enough time off. Stay as long as you want. I am glad for the company. We spent the weekend cooking together, taking walks around the property, sitting on the dock with our feet in the water. Helen was easy to be around, content to read while I worked in the garden, happy to help with chores without being asked. On Sunday evening, we opened a bottle of wine and she asked the question I had been waiting for. Do you feel bad about what you did? The sabotage? I considered this carefully. No, I feel bad that it had to come to that. I wish Vanessa had listened to me from the start. But do I regret protecting what was mine? Not for a second. Good, because you should not. Helen refilled our glasses. You spent your whole life taking care of everyone else. You earned the right to be selfish about this one thing. It is not even selfish, though. That is what Vanessa never understood. Wanting peace after decades of work is not selfish. It is necessary. It is survival. Well, you survived, and you won. I did not win. I just got back what was already mine. Helen smiled. Semantics. You outsmarted your own daughter and ended up with a cabin worth twice what you paid for it. That is a win in my book. We laughed about it then. About the absurdity of the whole situation. About me living in a shed while secretly destroying my own property. About Vanessa pouring money into a failing business without realizing her mother was the reason it was failing. About Bradley's spreadsheets that never accounted for sabotage. When Helen left on Wednesday, the cabin felt quiet, but not lonely. I had proven to myself that I could live alone, that I did not need constant company or validation. But I had also learned that selectively letting people in, people who respected my space and my choices, made the solitude even sweeter. October brought the anniversary of when Vanessa had first arrived with her Airbnb scheme. I thought about marking the date somehow, but decided against it. The past was the past, and dwelling on it would only steal from the present. Instead, I spent the day winterizing the cabin, draining the outdoor faucets, checking the insulation, stacking firewood under the tarp. The nights were getting cold, and soon the lake would start to freeze. This would be my first full winter here, and I was determined to enjoy it. Vanessa called on Halloween. Bradley and I wanted to invite you to Thanksgiving this year, at our house. We promise it will just be family, low-key, nothing stressful. Can I bring anything? Just yourself. She hesitated. And Mom, thank you for giving me another chance. I know I do not deserve it, but I am grateful. Everyone deserves a second chance, honey. Just not a third one. She laughed, but I could hear the understanding beneath it. She knew I meant what I said. One more betrayal, one more boundary crossed, and we would be done. Not just with the cabin, but with our relationship entirely. Some bridges, once burned, could not be rebuilt. Thanksgiving at Vanessa's house was surprisingly pleasant. Bradley was more relaxed than I had ever seen him, and Vanessa seemed lighter somehow, as if losing the cabin business had lifted a weight rather than adding one. We ate turkey and stuffing and pumpkin pie, and no one mentioned the Airbnb or the money or the months of conflict that had defined the past year. On the drive home, I thought about forgiveness and whether I had truly forgiven my daughter. The answer was complicated. I had forgiven her enough to maintain a relationship, enough to share holidays and phone calls and occasional visits, but I would never forget what she had done, and I would never fully trust her judgment again. Some damages leave scars, even after they heal. December came with heavy snow and temperatures that dropped below zero. The cabin stayed warm thanks to the new insulation and windows Vanessa had installed. I burned through firewood quickly and made a note to order more for January. The expense was manageable, especially now that I was not paying rent somewhere else or supporting anyone but myself. Christmas was quiet. Helen came up for a few days, and we exchanged small gifts and ate cookies and watched old movies. Vanessa called on Christmas morning, and we talked for 20 minutes about nothing important. It was enough. When the new year arrived, I stood on the porch at midnight with a mug of hot tea and listened to the silence. No guests counting down, no parties, no chaos, just me and the lake and the stars overhead. It was perfect. In January, I received a letter from Vanessa, an actual letter, handwritten on nice stationery. She wrote about how much she had learned from the cabin disaster, how it had forced her to reevaluate her priorities and her approach to life. She wrote about going to therapy to work on her control issues and her tendency to steamroll over other people's wishes. She wrote about how sorry she was, not just for the Airbnb scheme, but for years of not really listening to me. I read the letter 3 times, sitting at the kitchen table with my morning coffee. Then I folded it carefully and put it in a drawer. I did not frame it or display it, but I kept it. Evidence that people could change, or at least that they could try. The winter passed slowly, quietly, peacefully. I read books from the library, learned to knit from a tutorial online, took long walks on the frozen lake. I learned to appreciate the stark beauty of winter, the way the snow transformed the landscape into something elemental and pure. In March, as the ice began to break up and the first signs of spring appeared, I received an email from the Airbnb company. They were following up on the listing Vanessa had created, asking if we wanted to reactivate it for the upcoming summer season. I stared at the email for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Some chapters needed to stay closed. Spring returned with mud and black flies, just as Betty had promised. But it also brought wildflowers and baby ducks and loons returning to nest. I spent my days working in the garden, expanding it to include more vegetables. I was learning to be more self-sufficient, to rely less on trips to town, and more on what I could grow or catch myself. Vanessa visited in April with surprising news. She and Bradley were expecting a baby, their first. She was nervous and excited and wanted my advice on everything from cribs to childcare. I gave it freely, honestly, without holding grudges or throwing past mistakes in her face. Because that was the thing about revenge. It was only satisfying if you knew when to stop. I had taken back my cabin and taught my daughter a lesson. Now it was time to move forward, to build something new instead of dwelling on what had been destroyed. The baby arrived in September, a girl they named Sophie. I drove down to Minneapolis to meet her. This tiny creature who would grow up never knowing about the battle fought over a cabin, or the lengths her grandmother had gone to protect her peace. Sophie would know me as the woman who lived by the lake, who grew her own vegetables and told stories about loons and taught her to fish from the dock. And that was exactly who I wanted to be. By the time Sophie turned 1, Vanessa and I had rebuilt our relationship into something healthier than it had ever been. We talked regularly, but not constantly. She visited occasionally, but always asked first. She offered advice only when requested, and accepted my decisions even when she disagreed with them. The boundaries I had fought so hard to establish had become the foundation of a better relationship. On a cool October evening, 2 years after I first bought the cabin, I sat on the porch with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders and thought about everything that had happened. The initial joy of ownership, the betrayal of my daughter's scheme, the months of living in the shed while strangers enjoyed my home, the careful sabotage that saved me, the final victory that was really just reclaiming what had always been mine. It had been exhausting and painful, and harder than I ever imagined. But it had also taught me something crucial. I was stronger than I thought, more resourceful, more willing to fight for what mattered. For 35 years, I had been someone who worked hard and kept her head down and let other people make decisions about her life. The cabin had changed that. Or maybe I had changed that, and the cabin was just where it happened. Either way, I was different now. Harder in some ways, softer in others. Less willing to compromise on things that mattered, more willing to forgive when forgiveness was earned. I had learned to protect my peace with the same fierce determination I had once used to provide for my family, and I had learned that sometimes the best revenge was not destroying your enemy, but simply refusing to let them destroy you. Vanessa never fully recovered from the financial loss of the cabin venture. The $150,000 she and Bradley had invested became a cautionary tale in their marriage, a reminder of what happened when ambition overrode wisdom. Bradley held the failure over her for years, bringing it up during arguments and using it as evidence that his judgment was superior. Their relationship grew strained under the weight of that debt and resentment. Eventually, they sold their house in Minneapolis and moved to a smaller place in the suburbs, downsizing their lifestyle to dig out from under the mistakes they had made. Vanessa took a second job to help cover the losses, spending evenings and weekends working when she could have been with her daughter. The lesson she learned was expensive, paid for in money and time and the slow erosion of her marriage. She never suggested another business scheme to anyone, least of all to me. As for me, I spent my remaining years at the cabin exactly as I had planned from the beginning. In peace, on my own terms, answerable to no one but myself. The lake became my sanctuary, the seasons my calendar, the loons my evening companions. I grew old there gracefully, watching Sophie grow up during summer visits, teaching her to fish and canoe and appreciate silence. When I looked back on the revenge I had taken, I felt no guilt, only satisfaction. I had protected what was mine, and in doing so, I had finally learned to protect myself.